Time for some Ohio State football talk here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We please encourage you to help us build the channel by grabbing the Amazon link in the description section below. Just use Amazon using that link. Doesn't cost you an extra penny. Also, we've got 2 exclusive live streams at our Voice of College Football community. Grab that link down below as well. 2 exclusive live streams where I bring you on to talk college football with me and respond to your viewer comments, totaling more than 40,000 year to date. So thank you so much for the response. Got Chip Minute on the line from theozone.net. Chip, first time here. We appreciate you stopping by.
Like you said, first time caller, long time listener. It's tremendous. I'm tremendously honored to be a part of your program. I really enjoy everything you do for college football. So thank you again for offering me the opportunity to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Chip. Of course, we bring on your guy, Tony Gerdeman, quite often and have some nice conversations with him. I'm sure this will be much of the same.
Well, I appreciate that. And yes, Tony Gerdeman is a tremendous resource for Ohio State football, especially at theozone.net. For those of your viewers who are not familiar with theozone.net, please go there because Tony Gerdeman, I'm merely a contributor. Tony Gerdeman is kind of the brains of the operation, so to speak.
Tony's the brains of the operation, and you're still holding it together. That's good to know. No, Tony's a great guy, and again, the insight that we gained from him is remarkable. So good stuff, I'm sure, is to come with Chip here. And just about a day and a half ago, we learned of another Ohio State commit in the 2020 class. This is linebacker Cody Simon out of New Jersey, who was targeted by many to go to Nebraska, a team that's on Ohio State's schedule this year. Your thoughts about Simon's commitment, and also just any particular thoughts about the haul to date in 2020?
Well, it's very, very remarkable the job that Ryan Day has been doing in his first year as Ohio State's head coach. I think there were a lot of concerns from the Ohio State fan base that here's a career assistant moving into one of the most prestigious jobs in all of college football, following a legendary head coach in Urban Meyer. And as you said, Ohio State has been making a haul recently. Cody Simon is among them. Also, yesterday, Darian Henry is a defensive end, defensive lineman out of Cincinnati Princeton, also verbally committed. But you asked about Cody Simon. He's listed 6'1" outside linebacker. Viewing some of the recruiting highlights of Cody Simon, he's a very versatile player, and he plays on offense as well for his high school at wide receiver. So this is just pure speculation on my part. I'm kind of curious to see if Cody Simon is going to get an opportunity to play at the bullet linebacker position. It's kind of a hybrid linebacker / safety position when he eventually winds up on campus for Ohio State. Getting to Darian Henry as a defensive lineman, I think part of the attraction that he has is his versatility to play not only as a defensive end, but also as an interior defensive lineman. The fact that longtime Ohio State defensive line coach Larry Johnson, his reputation precedes him. I think that Henry looked at the opportunity to be coached by one of, if not the best defensive line coaches in all of college football, certainly played a major part in his commitment. But as you said, Ohio State, they've been making a haul on the recruiting trail. There's 15 verbal commitments. Just this last week alone, Ohio State was also able to obtain an offensive lineman commitment for the class of 2021, a very prominent Ohio offensive lineman by the name of Ben Chrisman from the Richfield Revere area. He's listed at 6'6", 299 pounds. So even in the 2021 class, which has far to go, they have 4 very, very highly touted prospects. So all of the concerns that Ryan Day wouldn't be able to be successful on the recruiting trail, I think those are being put to rest with the work that he and his staff have been doing so far this summer.
As you mentioned, Henry, the 11th rated defensive tackle in the country, 2nd rated player in the state, Ben Chrisman out of Revere High School, a stomping ground of mine, very close to where I grew up. Top 3 player in the state in a class that I just learned from our guy Tony Gerdeman just this week for the next couple seasons, especially that 2021 class appears to be one of the stronger ones in recent Ohio high school play.
Yes. And I guess for your longtime listeners, I was going to say that Richfield, besides being the home of Ben Christman, it was the longtime home of the Cleveland Cavaliers before they moved downtown. So the home of the vaunted Richfield Coliseum. I'm familiar with that as well. But as Tony Gerdeman mentioned on your recent show, Ohio does have a lot of highly talented, highly touted young men playing throughout the state. And it is very, very rewarding as an Ohio State fan to see that Ryan Day and his staff have been making a lot of focused attention on offering and getting these young men from the state of Ohio to commit to the Buckeyes.
Got Chip Minnick on the line from the ozone.net. Please join him, the rest of the staff right there, Tony Gerdeman included, as they do some excellent work on Ohio State football coverage. And of course, we're just a few weeks away from Big Ten Media Days, and then the boys hit the field to practice just a few days after that. And then about a month after that, of course, they hit the field in anger at Ohio Stadium. And much has been made, including for myself, about the lack of a Power 5 opponent or a big name opponent, with Cincinnati being basically the headliner on the schedule from a non-conference standpoint. But if you delve a little bit deeper, the hand that Ohio State was given, and it's not something that hasn't hit just about every team in the Big Ten. I know Nebraska a couple of years ago had to play Michigan State. Penn State was their draw out of the Big Ten Eastern Division. Or maybe it was Ohio State, Michigan State. I know they slapped Nebraska pretty hard as they entered the Big Ten. In particular, Ohio State's Big Ten schedule, with a draw of Nebraska, Northwestern, and Wisconsin out of the Big Ten West, sets up as a pretty difficult slate for the Buckeyes in 2019, despite the lack of a big-time non-conference opponent.
I completely agree with you. I think at first glance, I think critics of Ohio State's schedule, and I'm just thinking when I say critics across the country, they could look at it, okay, there isn't any kind of big name game. You referenced the idea of Cincinnati, and I'm very intrigued, and I think a lot of Ohio State fans are overlooking Cincinnati because, let's face it, in many years in the past, Cincinnati has been a game that Ohio State has been able to win quite handily. With Luke Fickell at the helm as Ohio State, as a former Ohio State assistant, I think this is gonna be a game that Ohio State's gonna have their hands full for most of it. I do believe that Ohio State will come out on top, but I'm certainly confident that Luke Fickell is going to have Cincinnati ready to go when he and former Ohio State linebacker, current Cincinnati defensive coordinator Marcus Freeman come into Ohio Stadium. So that's on the non-conference side of things. You mentioned the Big Ten conference schedule, and I was thinking of something. I realized that you referenced the game at Nebraska as being one of Ohio State's crossover games this year, and I apologize for the fact that I'm going to kind of embellish some of the time and dates on this, but former head coach Jim Tressel used to quote former Ohio State coach Earl Bruce by saying, Coach Bruce liked to say that October is for pretenders and November is for contenders. And I mean this with all due respect to former coaches Tressel and Bruce. But I certainly believe the Big Ten schedule makers did not give Ohio State any benefit whatsoever, because when you look at that stretch of the Ohio State schedule, beginning the game on September 28th, and there hasn't been a kickoff established yet, but I'm kind of speculating that will be a night game. I'd be highly surprised if it wasn't. That game at Nebraska, Ohio State fans certainly recall that last year Nebraska gave Ohio State everything that they could handle and then some, and Ohio State was fortunate to come out on the winning end of that one. But then when you get into October, Ohio State plays Michigan State that first weekend in October, on October 5th, 7:30 p.m. kickoff. Any Ohio State fan, such as myself, can certainly recall all of the horrors and miseries that Michigan State has laid at the feet of Ohio State over the last several years. 2015 is the most recent one. Ohio State's been winning the last several games, but let's face it, Michigan State always seems to harass and just make Ohio State's job that much more difficult. When you look at the remainder of October, Ohio State has a Friday night game, which don't get me started on. I'm a purist. I'm a traditionalist. I don't think that that's right, but they go at Northwestern. That was a tough game in the Big Ten championship. Ohio State came out on head against Northwestern, but that's a Friday night game against what should be a very difficult Big Ten West opponent in Northwestern. And then Ohio State gets to come home and play a very physical smash mouth football game in Wisconsin. So when you look at that stretch of games at the end of September at Nebraska, they play Michigan State at home. They go at Northwestern. They play Wisconsin. That stretch of games, with all due respect to former Coach Trussell and former Coach Bruce, I think if Ohio State comes out of October, they will certainly show that they, without any blemishes on the record, they will certainly show that they are worthy of being a contender if they can survive that stretch of games in 2019.
So we got Chick Minnick on the line from the Ozone, dropping by to talk Ohio State football, and we're looking at the Buckeyes 2019 schedule. So I'm going to go back from the top. Of course, it's always interesting when Lane Kiffin's involved. So he comes to town week number one with his Florida Atlantic team that was a bit disappointing last year after he broke in with a big much hoopla the season before and really delivered with a conference championship. We mentioned the Cincinnati game, which again, as you said, from a national perspective is going to be disregarded, but considering the Bearcats beat UCLA last year, they went 11-2. They were very competitive against UCF in particular and almost winning a conference championship in the best of the group of 5 leagues. So Cincinnati's going to be difficult to deal with. And Ohio State fans will remember, of course, the beloved 2002 national championship team had to survive a game at Paul Brown Stadium in Cincinnati on a Chris Gamble interception in the end zone to preserve a win over the Bearcats early in the season in 2002. Indiana, in recent years, has played Ohio State, Michigan State, and Penn State extremely tough almost every time. And given the Buckeyes fits, maybe the final scores wouldn't necessarily indicate that the last couple times out, but they've been extremely close games with 10 or 12 minutes left in the game. And then getting into that stretch after the Miami of Ohio game at Ohio Stadium that you reference here with Nebraska, Michigan State, Northwestern, and Wisconsin. 2 of those games have yet to be determined in regards to game time, but it could be a stretch of 4 night games for Ohio State with 2 at home and 2 on the road. The Nebraska game and playing that well against the Buckeyes in Columbus last year, 36-31 game. Nebraska actually had the ball under like 5 minutes to play and could have taken the lead. Maybe that's going to be a blessing in disguise to get Ohio State's attention, that this is not a 4-8 football team, that this is a team that was very good down the stretch in playing Ohio State close, taking Iowa to a last-second field goal, just pounding Minnesota, winning a few other games, beating Michigan State at home. So they were just a different team in November, and certainly many of the projections are that they are going to seriously contend in the West. So maybe that 36-31 outcome is a blessing now that Ohio State players would take that game a little bit more seriously than they would otherwise, especially going there.
I completely agree with you. I think Scott Frost certainly has Nebraska's program pointed in the right direction. The recruiting is certainly on the upswing. Ohio State fans who follow any kind of recruiting are familiar with the fact that Ohio State did recruit Adrian Martinez at quarterback, who is Nebraska's starting quarterback, and he certainly showed that he has a very bright future at the helm for the Cornhuskers. I think Nebraska, I don't have their schedule committed to memory per se, but I believe offhand it seems like a very strong likelihood that Nebraska should be coming into that game against Ohio State undefeated. It would be a surprise to me if Ohio State and Nebraska is not a night game. I'm in the minority here, but I know that with Fox having the first pick in a lot of the college football games, their standards this year has been to have what they consider the biggest and best game of the afternoon to be on at noon, and I would consider that a minor victory. If Ohio State Nebraska was at noon, that would kind of help the Buckeyes, because let's face it, I think the good fans of Nebraska are certainly ready and eager to kind of make things very difficult for Ohio State, especially in the last several years prior to Scott Frost coming on board. Ohio State certainly had their way with Nebraska. I think Nebraska fans are eager to kind of get some what they believe well-deserved revenge on Ohio State when they can, when the Buckeyes come to town on September 28th.
Yeah, excluding that final matchup that we referenced at Ohio Stadium last year, Ohio State has completely annihilated Nebraska a string of times. Even a Nebraska team that went on to the Big Ten championship game, Ohio State had their way with them like 63-38. Leading into, yes, at the beginning of the Urban Meyer era in the undefeated season in 2012. We know Michigan State's never scared of anyone. The talent gap might be there, but Michigan State, Mark Antonio, never afraid to go anywhere. And you referenced the 2015 game, and I will point to that in just a second as we get to the latter stages of the schedule, because I think there's a distinction to be made about the end of the schedule as well. One caveat in all this of the Nebraska, Michigan State, Northwestern, and Wisconsin run is that there is a bye week between the 4 games to split the 4. So there is some time off to get prepared for that trip to Northwestern. I'm going to go back to 2002 again. The national championship run also included a very, very tight game at a Northwestern team that, from a talent standpoint, shouldn't have been able to compete with that Ohio State team. And that was a close game as well at Northwestern. Ohio State went there 2013. That was an extremely close game at night in which there was a famous play at the end of the game where Ohio State scored a touchdown, a fumble in the end zone. Northwestern was scrambling around trying to create a play, only down 34-30. So the Buckeyes had to escape that game. And, of course, went to Northwestern just a couple of years after the national championship season and lost in overtime at Northwestern. And Wisconsin, I will put them in the Michigan State category. They may not come with the most elite athletes and 5 stars, but they're not going to be wowed by any atmosphere, and they'll be just fine playing at Ohio Stadium. And again, the national narrative thinks that Wisconsin, Ohio State in 59-0 in 2014, but otherwise the series has been extremely difficult for the Buckeyes to manage, even though the wins and losses are certainly on Ohio State's side with Wisconsin in recent years. So then we get into November, Chip, and we got Maryland, Rutgers, Penn State, Michigan.
Well, let's look at those games. As you said, Ohio State, they have this is one of those kind of quirky schedule years where they have another bye at the beginning of November. So the first weekend in November, Ohio State, they can kind of, if you want to think of it, they can kind of catch their breath after that grueling October stretch run that we've been talking about. So then they get Maryland at home, and we've been talking about in recent years how Ohio State's had their way with Nebraska up until last year. Ohio State had a similar kind of a run with Maryland. And any Ohio State fan recalls it was just by sheer good fortune. That's all we can attribute it to, that Ohio State was able to escape out of Maryland last year on that 2-point conversion attempt that did not work for the Terrapins. So I think Ohio State will be much more prepared for Maryland. I know that Maryland, they're still kind of in that rebuilding phase, which I think that they will be able to be more competitive much more rapidly. But I think Ohio State will be ready for them, considering it is a home game against the Terrapins. Now, they do get a trip to Rutgers, and I want to be as kind and polite as I can. This is a program that has really been struggling. I genuinely feel for Chris Ash. He was a tremendous assistant coach for Ohio State during the national championship run in 2014. Ever since he has taken over at Rutgers, you would think that Urban Meyer is trying to really was really trying to toughen him up because he certainly did not pull any punches whatsoever. I mean, the average score was, I think I was looking at it, and math is not my strong suit, but the average score was about like 55-1 or 55-2 over the 3-year stretch that Chris Ash has been at the helm. But I don't see Rutgers being able to effectively keep pace with the Buckeyes. But then at the tail end of the season, Ohio State's final home game, the Big Ten schedule makers again did the Buckeyes no favors. They get Penn State And here's a team that for the last 2 years has had Ohio State on the ropes. They just could not deliver that final knockout punch. Ohio State was able to pull out a comeback win at home 2 years ago in Ohio Stadium, and then last year in Happy Valley at night. So I'm sure the Nittany Lions are going to be ready. And who can? I mean, I don't think there's too much hype ever for the game, which Jim Harbaugh. This is he's been hearing about this all off season. He's been hearing about it nonstop. The Michigan fans are certainly eager for a win, considering it's been 7 straight years of losses to Ohio State. So as we began our interview, I think this is going to be a very challenging first year schedule for Ryan Day. I certainly don't believe that the stakes, that the bar is still there for him. I think that the hope and the goal and the quest is always to be a national championship contender. But I also believe that Ohio State fans have to kind of recognize the fact that this is a very difficult schedule, no matter who the head coach is.
Yes, so Ohio State's been the best team in the Big Ten, but the second and third best teams in the Big Ten, if you look at a 3-year stretch of 2016, 17, and 18, are Penn State and Michigan. And as you mentioned, the Buckeyes escaped by the slimmest of margins, 39-38 and 27-26, both in comeback fashion the last 2 years. And so in addition to a number of other components in the schedule that I look at, when I look at an Ohio State or Michigan schedule, I know what's on the line, regardless of the records, and most likely there's going to be a championship on the line. But even if there's not, with the magnitude of the rivalry, I always look to see some seasons Ohio State gets a cushion before they've got Michigan. They get a Rutgers, they get a Maryland, they get somebody of that ilk, Illinois, leading into a Michigan down through the years. But every so often, and it seems to be more so in recent years, they get a Michigan State. That's one of the best teams in the country, as you mentioned, in 2015, leading into Michigan. This year, it's Penn State leading into Michigan, and not that cushion to be like, okay, we're going to be in a 42-10 game in the fourth quarter, be able to ease off and look ahead to the game. They got Penn State the week before. So the two best programs in the Big Ten outside of Ohio State over the last several seasons lined up right there at the end of the season in Penn State and Michigan. So no ease into the final game at Ann Arbor for the Buckeyes.
And one of I realized a few moments ago when we were talking about some of the games, the kickoffs haven't been set yet. The game is a traditional noon game, and it's been set. It's going to be on Fox. And this is wishful thinking on one Ohio State fan's mind. Maybe other people have a different opinion, and that's completely okay. But personally, I'm the mindset that I think that the Ohio State coaches are probably hoping that the Penn State game is a noon game, simply because of the magnitude of the game in Ann Arbor the following week. If instead of having a later game like a 3:30 kickoff, for example, if they can finish up against Penn State at 3 o'clock, 3:30, you know as well as I do how intense the Ohio State coaches get, how the campus gets. I mean, they block out the letter M, all over campus. I mean, it's pretty intense. So I think that there might be a mindset of, let's get to our game preparations for the Wolverines as soon as possible. And they might prefer having a noon kickoff against Penn State.
So if I remember the ABC/ESPN agreement with Fox and with the leagues, Fox's contracts are with the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the Big 10. And Fox has been able to garnish the number one position of selection. Therefore, it's translated into now 3 consecutive Ohio State-Michigan games on Fox, 2017, 18, and now 19. After that, it had been an ABC game forever, for going back to the 80s when CBS had it.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, yeah, this is why we know that it's going to be on Fox at noon, is because this is their number one selection, and it makes total sense. It's the highest rated game in college football almost every season. But the second selection then would defer to ABC, if I understand this, /ESPN, So I don't know if they go the Ohio State Penn State route and that switches back to them, or maybe there's an Oklahoma Texas move in there that would default to the next biggest Big Ten game down to a third spot. And so maybe it is a Fox game, and we'll just have to see how that plays out in terms of the selections and when those are made. But it's an interesting point that you bring up. Playing until close to midnight against Penn State in a 31-28 kind of game to the wire may not be the best, almost taking away a full 12 or 14 hours away from the team in preparation for the trip to Michigan.
Yes, I mean, in Penn State, let's give credit to Penn State. The last, as we said a few moments ago, regardless of when the kickoff does take place, if it is a noon game, a 3:30 game, I'd be tremendously surprised if it is a night game, just because it is November 23rd, and I think the Big Ten still has a lot of restrictions on night games within November. I mean, I'm kind of stammering here because I'm not entirely sure as to when they can and when they cannot. But giving credit to Penn State, we were talking about recruiting at the beginning. There are a lot of, even though Penn State has lost a lot of talented players, most notably Trace McSorley, there are a lot of talented players on that Nittany Lion roster that Ohio State offered scholarships to, that they decided to become Nittany Lions instead. So it's not as though, even though Penn State lost a lot of talent, it's not as though that this is a team devoid of talent, that Ohio State is going to be playing any kind of a pushover game against Penn State whatsoever.
And Penn State's going to bring a team that's a little bit different than they have in recent years, where the emphasis has been on an explosive offense with Joe Moorhead prior to last year being one of the top offensive coordinators, Trace McSorley, elite wide receivers, Saquon Barkley a couple of years ago, those kind of teams. Saquon obviously had his big breakout game when we all found out about him at Columbus against the Buckeyes. But this Penn State team is primed to have maybe the best defense in the conference, and to bring along a young quarterback. And by this point, we should know that Sean Clifford should be in play and should be set to be a main contributor, and should have his sea legs at that point of the season. So yeah, it's going to be a difficult challenge for the Buckeyes. Again, no Power 5 in the non-conference, but a very difficult Big Ten slate, playing in the better division, and then facing what are probably the three best teams in the Western Division. So Chip, anything else on the schedule?
Like I said, I think the schedule makers did Ohio State no favors as it relates to the Big Ten portion of it. I think Ryan Day, if he can have Ohio State still within the college football playoff conversation at the end of the season, I think maybe, and I don't want to jinx Coach Day before he even gets the opportunity, maybe he'll actually get something called the Big Ten Coach of the Year, something that Ohio State coaches seemingly are maybe that they're ineligible to receive, and we just haven't received the memo yet, because for so many years, Ohio State coaches have had terrific seasons, but Ohio State coaches haven't been able to bring home that coveted award since Earl Bruce did it many years ago.
Well, I will let some folks know as I look at this schedule right here that Phil Steele has Ohio State's schedule ranked number 17th most difficult in the nation. I'm doing a schedule ranking right now. I rank all the Power 5 schedules 70 all the way up to number 1. We're at number 20 right now, and I have yet to touch Ohio State, so I'm going to be somewhere in that range as well. It's all mapped out already. But we'll see where the Buckeyes land on my list. Chip Minnick, you can join his work at theozone.net, along with Tony Gerdeman and the rest of the staff, in covering Ohio State football just about as well as anyone. Chip, we appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a wonderful experience. Thank you.